Welcome to On Texas Football, a little weekend recruiting portal update edition. I'm CJ Vogel, joined as always by Gerry Hamilton. And look, Texas is still playing on the field, but the recruiting never stops either. And as the calendar flips to 2025, Gerry, that means the emphasis on 2026, as well as filling out the portal for next year's roster as well, becomes all the more important. So far, Texas, 3 guys outed out of the transfer portal, and then 9 guys have left the program or will leave the program. Obviously, Justice Finkley, Tia Savea, they're still practicing with the Longhorns at the moment. But Texas set to host a couple guys this weekend already. We'll talk about those guys coming up, as well as a few rule changes for 2026, as well as what's ahead. 3 weeks from now is kind of when we expect that junior day to take place for the 2026 class on campus. A lot to break down here. But Gerry, let's talk about these 2 visitors on campus this weekend for the Longhorns. The first, Marvin Jones, the edge rusher out of Florida State, and then Travis Shawn, the defensive lineman out of North Carolina.
Yeah, Marvin Jones came out of American Heritage in Plantation, Florida, same school as Dia Bell, by the way, a 2026 quarterback commitment. As a 5-star prospect, obviously his father, Marvin Jones, was a star at FSU, played in the league. Really good, a really high-end player, obviously. But Marvin Jones Jr. signed with Georgia over Florida State coming out of high school, which surprised a lot of people. He went to Georgia, and he was more of a set-the-edge player for them, not really one of the guys they relied upon for pass rush for a couple of years. Then he transfers to FSU. This last year had 4 sacks. I think rushing the passer is becoming maybe a strength of his versus playing the run at the SEC level. But he's on campus, visited Oklahoma as well. And it's an interesting visit, because if Texas were to make a push on him, does that say, okay, we're making sure we have some upperclassmen, a guy that's played a lot of football that can kind of compete with Colton Vasek and those guys where Barron Sorrell graduated? Or would he potentially play behind Colin Simmons if Trey Moore were to go pro after this year? That's kind of the interesting twist there with Marvin Jones is where would Texas see him if they made a push for him?
Yeah, see, that would be interesting, because we've talked about the edge room, Gerry, this year, obviously taking that leap forward in production, but also in depth, right? And it was interesting for me having a walk through the Peach Bowl practices, and, you get to see these guys up close and personal once again, and the addition of Lance Jackson to this room makes things interesting, as he and Zeno Umeozulu were both wearing their black scout team jerseys. I'm sitting there saying, wow, the size, the mass, the athleticism, and the length for Texas looks pretty significant from where it was in years past. So where a Jones would fit in this Texas defensive end room would be really interesting for me. But of course, defensive line, the interior defensive line remains a big push for the Texas Longhorns. They've added one, Cole Brevard. He, of course, with the Longhorns in Atlanta for the Peach Bowl win as well. But they need at least 3 others, maybe even 4 out of the portal. One name that we're beginning to see a clearer picture with is Travis Shawn in North Carolina, who was on campus, is currently on campus as we are recording this Saturday morning.
Yeah, I think there's 2 things Texas is looking for. One, frontline starter level player, Cole Brevard. And then there's the guys who are really strong rotational players that can play the run in the SEC. Travis Shawn is that guy. He is a guy that in 3 seasons, North Carolina had 55 tackles, 27 solo tackles. No sacks. He's an over the ball. He's a play the run guy. He can hold point of attack. He can play gap, right? And he can slow down the inside run game. But Travis Shawn, that's what he would be, another one of those guys if Texas made the big push to try to close out Travis Shawn, 6'5", 330, a guy, again, highly ranked player coming out of high school, out of Greensboro, North Carolina. So one of the top defensive line recruits in the country, coming out of the Tar Heel State, signed with North Carolina. But again, over the Texas is looking for on the interior, over guys who have to be able to play the run in the SEC. Play the run. That's what they're looking for. It doesn't mean they don't want a disruptor as a high-end player, a guy who could potentially push for a starting job. But outside of that, it's all about playing the run in this conference and against the schedule in the playoffs that Texas wants to play in future years.
Yeah, absolutely. And Shawn, going back to him and some of the stats, and you can kind of attribute Pro Football Focus stops as you want. It's technically, you know, a run tackle or play at the line of scrimmage that doesn't leak to the second level. Out of 20 tackles this year, 15 of them were credited as run stops. So there's your point as a run stopper. Again, no sacks, but that's what a lot of these edges are for. And hey, if there's one trait that we learned about Kenny Baker whenever he joined the Texas staff, is one of his coaching strengths is coaching up the pass rush, developing pass rush amongst those guys on the interior as well. Jerry, I know that.
And let's say this on Travis Shawn too. This is with the transfer of Sadir Mitchell. That opened up a spot for a rotational guy that plays the run, that can play over the ball, because Cole Brevard can't play all the snaps over the ball, right? That's not going to happen. You need a second guy with some experience to play over the ball in the SEC at Ohio State next year. That is where I think this push is coming from. If Texas makes this final push with Travis Shawn, is had Sadir Mitchell stayed, maybe you rolled the dice with Brevard and Sadir Mitchell as your over the ball guys, with some talented young guys coming in, Josiah Sharman, Myron Charles, but you don't know where they're going to be at until you get through spring practice. Justice Terry's more of that 5'3" guy. But with Travis Shawn, he would be you hate to say it, I mean, he's an upgrade. He would be an upgrade over Sadir Mitchell because he played so much football for North Carolina.
Yeah, that was going to be the big thing for me. Texas, again, when it comes to finding defensive linemen out of the portal, there's two really prerequisites, and it's 500 or more snaps, and it's 3 years of college experience. Shaw checks the box on both of those as well. Jerry, I know that the portal for relative to last year, maybe it's a little quieter for Texas as they continue this run. One name that I did want to bring up is the Branch brothers. You know, they're continuing to visit Miami. Georgia's in the mix. You know, a lot of schools are still picking and prodding. Do we expect Texas to pursue, or is it one of those kind of wait and see if they show up on campus or not?
I think we have to wait and see, because we've heard both on this. We've heard one source a couple of days ago said, look, they're going to visit. It's Arizona State, Georgia, visiting Miami, Texas, Tennessee. Potential visits, expected to visit, but this stuff can change. I mean, it changes depending on NIL value of Zion Branch at one school versus the next, right? This is a different recruitment because it's more than Zachariah Branch. So it's almost a wait and see to see if Texas makes a final call, push to get them on campus, doesn't think the duo is where they want to head, if they just want to get the singular wide receiver. So it's almost in wait and see mode right now because there are so many moving parts with this.
Of course, portal updates will be coming more and more. But one thing that is already here essentially is the 2026 class. And Jerry, you put a big note up on ontexasfootball.com earlier in the week regarding a big rule change for 2026. And that means Texas coaches and coaches really everywhere, their offseason just got a whole lot shorter because they're going to be on the move a little bit more.
Yeah, so last year in January, the NCAA's continues to move the timeline for these junior prospects up to where eventually we'll probably get to a point where they can sign and they're done. Whenever they sign, they're done. I think that's where we're headed. And then you have your ceremony in December because some of these guys are early graduates from high school nowadays. So, but last year, Steve Sarkisian assistants could go to the school. It used to be you could go to the school, talk to the coach, hey, say what's up to the kid. That changed. Then last year, the head coaches, Steve Sarkisian, we'll use him for instance, obviously, because of who we're covering here, and the Texas assistants could go see a Jonah Williams at Galveston Ball and not just go to the school, check in with the coach, be seen, sit down and have an in-school, I called it in-home, but it was essentially an in-school visit with Jonah and his family. And now they've gone a step further. You can go make true in-home visits in January with juniors, meaning Steve Sarkisian and whichever members of the staff, whatever position player it is, you could go to Frisco and go to the residence of Jalen Lott and sit down and have an in-home visit, old style, like that with a prospect that's a junior in January of their junior year. That's a major change. So you're about to start seeing on social media, you got assistant coaches from various all around the country start making in-home visits with prospects. And that's a big change from last year because, you know, if you went to see a kid and both parents worked, maybe one parent would show up, maybe two sometimes, maybe it's just one because somebody had a meeting or they couldn't get there from a work standpoint. Now we're to in-home visits, just like the old days in December before these kids signed. So that's a pretty sizable change as the recruiting calendar continues to speed up moving forward.
Jerry, are these coaches ever going to get a day off? My goodness, travel schedules.
Golf teams are taking a hit, man. Handicaps are going up.
100%. But to your point, I mean, I remember how big a deal it was when Texas was recruiting Michael Fasusi a year ago, and having the parents come up, sit in with Coach Flood, Steve Sarkisian. I believe Coach Choice was there as well. You know, to get that entire extra home meeting, it means a lot as well. Obviously, Texas looking to capitalize on some of these home visits in 2026 as well. But moving forward, we're about 3 weeks away from what we expect to be the Texas Junior Day. And a year ago, Texas brought in over 100 prospects. It was a big deal. It was about 20 degrees. So, hopefully it's not as cold when Texas hosts players on January 25th. But that's the date that we are expecting Texas to bring in a number of prospects. But the question is, will they be having 100-plus prospects once again this year?
It doesn't seem like it, but let's see, because the invite numbers that we're getting aren't that high yet. But let's see where this goes. In January 20th, here's another reason there won't be as many prospects on campus. That's going to be extremely competitive day nationally. Notre Dame, if you're in the college football playoff, January 25th is when you're going to have your junior day. Even Auburn is trying to have their junior day on the 25th around the Auburn-Tennessee basketball game. So it looks like January 25th, like Javian Osborne, the running back from Forney, I talked to him on Monday, and he said Texas and Notre Dame both said January 25th for junior day. They invited him. I talked to DeQuavies Beck, the linebacker at Carthage, Friday night. Texas invited him on the 25th. So the 25th is clearly Tyler Atkinson, the 5-star linebacker from Grayson. January 25th is what Tashard Choice mentioned to him and his family. So January 25th is Texas targeted junior day. And the reality is, if you were in the playoff, you almost had to schedule it for the 25th, because you couldn't sit there and invite kids and say, hey, look, if we lose, then we'll have this on this date. But if we win, it'll be on the 25th. You can't get kids to commit to come to your campus that way. They have to make plans because you're competing with other schools who weren't the playoffs that may have their junior days earlier, because the dead period ends tomorrow at midnight. So January 25th is going to be a Texas junior day. The question becomes, if Ohio State knocks out Texas, do they start to have a few more kids on campus before that? That's going to be the question. But you won't know that until the football season ends, and then they can start making plans. Texas obviously hopes they can't have anybody on campus till the 25th.
And of course, you know, whenever it comes to some of those big names, we'll keep you updated on ontexasfootball.com. Jerry, a few 2026 prospect updates as well. I was able to talk with KJ Ford out of Duncanville. Says he's hearing very often from Coach Banks, Coach Pete Kwiatkowski as well. Texas in contact with him. He right now just spent a week in Orlando for the Under Armour All-American game. Of course, remember, juniors were allowed to participate in these All-American Bowl games this year. He was down in Orlando. He is also planning to make the trip out to Hawaii for the Polynesian Bowl as well. So he's got a busy slate. He said he was unsure whether or not he would make the trip down to Austin for one of these junior days, one of these visit weekends as well. One of the other names I wanted to mention was Jermaine Kinsler, the 6'7" defensive end prospect out of Bergen Catholic in New Jersey, the same school as Sadir Mitchell. He said he still hears from Texas pretty often, and his contact up there was Pete Kwiatkowski. Previously, it was Kyle Flood, right? That's kind of his recruiting area. That since has been passed over to PK. Kinsler, of course, visited Texas most recently June 1st for the elite camp. Right now, it's kind of up in the air whether or not he makes the trip down to Austin, but we'll see with him as well. Anybody on the 26 side that you're starting to keep a close eye on, Jerry, when it comes to timelines, visit dates, anything along the lines of that?
Yeah, I mentioned Tyler Atkinson earlier. I spoke with somebody in his camp Saturday morning, and I was just looking for the update kind of because he has 49 offers. Everybody's coming after him. And I was just saying, what are you going to do on January 25th? Because I know how many of these schools are setting up junior days. And the interesting thing there is Tashard Choice and a couple of members of the defensive staff talked with Tyler Atkinson on Wednesday before the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl in Atlanta. I mean, this kind of talk. So not in person, obviously the dead period, but they spoke with him. He continues to be one of the top linebackers on the board. Your competition is Georgia, Auburn, Clemson, Tennessee, Texas are the 5 schools mentioned most, but I also was told that Marcus Freeman has made a big impact there. Being a former standout linebacker, what he's doing at Notre Dame, Notre Dame's going to be in the picture. Ohio State's in the picture, and Oregon's really trying hard to get in the picture right now as well. But I do expect Tyler Atkinson on campus. I don't know if it's going to be January 25th. I think that'll be tough for Texas because there's so many other area schools that are going to have a junior day within driving distance for them. But he will be on campus again prior to June official visits, as long as Texas stays in that fight. And as of right now, they're recruiting him like they're going to stay in the fight. Kosi Akpala, linebacker from Maid Creek, I think there's a good chance he's on campus on January 25th. He says he's going to decide in late March, early April. So he could be one of the higher-ranked 2026 prospects in the state to come off the board prior to senior years, July, August, September area. So we'll see there. So linebacker recruiting, running back recruiting heating up as well. Javian Osborne, Texas is all over him, invited him January 25th. Amari Latimer, the downhill back out of Sandy Creek in Tyrone, Georgia, west of Atlanta. Texas has invited him on the 25th. KJ Edwards, Texas is talking to the running back from Carthage. I mentioned his teammate DeQuavi's back. So things are starting to move. I think in the next week, 10 days, we're going to see a lot of kids announcing that they've been invited to January 25th Junior Day for the Texas Longhorns. Then it's the real competition of how many of these guys can you get on campus, since there's so many other junior days around regionally and nationally.
Yeah, of course. Starting to get to the point where decisions will be made, timelines will be created, et cetera, et cetera. I just wanted to revisit the 2025 cycle real quick. At the end of January, Texas had 5 kids committed in the class. That was KJ Lacey, Amari Winston, Brandon Brown, Anthony Williams, and Lance Jackson. Of course, 3 of those ended up signing the entire way. Texas has 2 committed right now with Chris Stewart and Dia Bell. So a lot still can happen. And for Texas fans, the commitments, again, I'm still leaning towards the spring, summer as when you'll start to see a lot of those names start to fall. But right now, to your point, Jerry, it's a really important window for the Longhorns to get guys on campus, get the face time with coaches, and on and on. But that about does it for today. Jerry, do you have anything final before we get out of here on the weekend?
The one thing I say is fans have to remain patient, because Sark sure is patient in recruiting. Yeah. They were looking for certain types, certain roles they need filled. From a portal standpoint, defensive line, we talked about, tight end, running. Shashard Choi says no at running back. I think the only running back they would have looked at potentially would have been Justice Haynes because of the long-term relationship. But I don't think that was a scenario that would have worked out, because Justice Haynes left a rotational back situation at Alabama. Are you really going to come back in to a Texas rotational situation with Cedric Baxter, Trey Wisner, and Jarrett Gibson, for sure, not knowing what Jaden Blue is going to do? So defensive line, all the way across the board. You already filled linebacker with Brad Spence. You have 1 D lineman. You want probably 2 to 3 more. We'll see what happens with Marvin Jones. Then we'll see if anything happens in the secondary at corner or potentially safety. You already have your punter in the fold. Bert Auburn says he's coming back. Could that change? So I think that's where we're sitting right now. Then there's wide receiver, which Texas wants a wide receiver. They want a speed guy to add to all this talented, skilled size they've recruited in the 25 cycle and will have returning next year.
Of course, we'll have everything updated on ontexasfootball.com. Jerry, thank you very, very much for the time. And you guys, thanks for listening and watching as well. Y'all have a good Saturday. And this does it for the Recruiting Portal Breakdown, little special edition. Y'all have a good one. Hook 'em.